Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, February the 4th, 12:35 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. And as usual, if you're here with us, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest to be discussed. And we are not really allowed to go too deep into fact patterns. We are not allowed naturally to provide consultations over a live stream or even consultations without charging a fee. That's something very particular and really enforced by both the Brazilian bar and the Portuguese bar as well. Okay, like the United States state bars, they don't typically worry about that, right? There is a lot of discretion in terms of how attorneys would provide their services in the United States. You know, like you see so many crazy ads, right? Like, John the Lion and all types of Jack the Hammer, right? Like all types of cheesy ads. And that's not typical of Brazil and Portugal. Like the bar associations in those two countries, they're much more restrictive. So just, keeping clear that I can address, pretty much any topic. Like I just need to be careful how deep I go into fact patterns that you would eventually share over here. But if we're just discussing, things that are, for instance, immigration related, and that they are public in a sense that there is a formal regulation addressing, I don't have an issue talking about the regulation and how the regulation addresses a specific point. All right, I hope that makes sense. And while you're still warming up, let me share what's going on in terms of news. Let's see what's going on in Brazil. So here the headline for Estadão, which is the newspaper that we typically share here on our live stream, it says that the son of Luis Fux, sorry about the about the name, but that's exactly what it is. Or in Portuguese, we say Fux. Okay, Luis Fux. See the number of cases at STF. STF is our Supreme Court, and STJ is the second highest court. Like we have two really high courts in Brazil. STJ initially was like the highest court, and then they decided to create like an even higher court, which is the STF. So nowadays, most like high-profile cases, they would be at either STJ or STF. Of course, they would start with a lower court and then progress through the system. But here, the bottom line is that, like the STJ and the STF, they are the controlling bodies in Brazil for pretty much anything, right? And so here, the headline says that the son of this particular justice had 5 cases with those two courts. And as soon as his father took, took a role at the STF, now he has 544 cases, right? And I think it's pretty difficult to say that this is a coincidence, but it's also, at least from my side, I also don't have the specifics. But if that's true, I would say it's pretty concerning, right? And it is a reality. I think that now, the Brazilian Supreme Court is going through a scrutiny, particularly after the Banco Master case, in which it was identified that at least 2 justices, they had a lot of interest into this case, and they were participating in the adjudication, right? Like it's crazy. Like they should excuse themselves, but they have not. Okay, so there is a whole discussion. Now the Brazilian Congress is, of course, like reacting to this type of situation. There is a proposal that the Brazilian Supreme Court should have some kind of ethics code. And there is some ethics codified like in the supreme regulations, but naturally, right? Like I mean, it's being ineffective to say the least. All right. So this is the headline over here. Another one which I think is interesting for those of you investing in Brazil real estate. There are several new subway lines being developed in São Paulo, right? New stations, and very interesting because São Paulo has traditionally invested more like in the suburbs, like to extend the capillarity of our subway system. But now, like the headline here is talking about Pinheiros, Moema, and Faria Lima. These are three traditional upscale, neighborhoods in São Paulo, right? So, there is like a subway station or subway lines for pretty much everyone. And so interesting about São Paulo, right? Like the subway system works really well. I would say maybe comparable to a subway system in New York City, other than, the maintenance of the system. Like, I think in most countries, right, like you're going to see a higher level of maintenance, particularly the visual aspect of the subways, like, and subways in New York, like historically, right, like you see those stations that look like post-apocalypse, right? But yes, in São Paulo, it's really well kept. There is also another nuance which I think is very interesting, and it's more cultural. If you are in a subway in São Paulo, let's say if you sit down at the station, very quickly, like a security officer would come to you and say, listen, you cannot sit down over here, right? So whenever you are in the United States, you're going to see people sitting around, like if you are in an airport, like you're going to see, you could see teenagers or young adults like sitting anywhere, like working out of a computer. Nobody would ever bother them, right? Like they're not doing anything. In Brazil, there is this kind of expectation of how you should behave. And of course, that doesn't always work. But at the subway, that's something that I think is pretty interesting. If someone would sit down on a subway, like a security officer would come over and say, listen, you cannot sit down over here, right? Okay, so that's it. Let's take a look at our chat window and see if we have any participation so far. All right, we have Steven Nichols. During the process of getting my Brazilian visa and CPF, I may have to be moving from the Chicago consular jurisdiction to that of Houston. Can I manage this without problems? Yes, Steven. Yes. And for you, to be changing consulates, right? Like typically, you're gonna need to show a matching driver license, okay? Like consulates, the Brazilian consulates, they are pretty strict. Like they don't wanna have people doing forum shopping, meaning that you shouldn't be choosing which consulate you pick, and they are gonna enforce that traditionally through a driver license, right? So let's say if today you have, a driver license that is at Chicago's consulate satisfaction, you're good. And but if you're gonna be going to Houston, I assume you would have a driver license amenable to the Houston consulate, right? And I'm not talking about the states because, Houston is not only for Texas, is actually for a group of states, and the same thing with Chicago, right? So you need to make sure that your driver license is going to match the jurisdiction for that particular consulate. Otherwise, they are not going to let you use their services, all right? Pretty traditional and pretty enforced, Steven. General Principal, boa tarde, Miss Oliveira. Boa tarde, General Principal. Good to see you over here. Hope everything is well. Same thing with you. Would you mind explaining the scope and responsibilities of the cartórios? are they government-owned, regulated, or involved in legislation? Very interesting question, General Principal. And cartorios, they have a hybrid nature. Okay, so they are not private, and they are not from the government. They have this hybrid nature, right? And at least when we are at law school, like, we learn that they are actually private, but they are performing a public function, right? So they are not really 100% private. They are private in a sense that the head of the cartório is called typically tabelião, right? And the tabelião is an individual who's going to be entirely responsible for that cartório. A tabelião, who's the head of the cartório, typically will have to study for, traditionally at least for a decade after graduating from law school to be able to secure a good cartório. Like cartórios, they are made available through public examination, meaning that you need to attend a bunch of tests and written tests, oral tests, in-person tests. They are also going to examine your degrees, like the degrees that you have and so on. And for competitive cartórios, like, in the city of São Paulo or the city of Rio de Janeiro, sometimes people are going to spend a few decades to be able to pass such examination, right? So I like to say, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say, but tabeliãos or the heads of the cartórios in like big cities, in average, they are, way ahead of attorneys in terms of understanding of law, right? Very interesting, right? And that's why I typically never translate a cartório as a notary public, because, at least in the United States, a notary public is something that you can basically learn in a weekend, right? Like, so let's say on Friday, I decide I want to be a notary public, on Friday, right? And then I spend my Saturday and Sunday studying what I need to know about notary public, and then on Monday I sit for an examination, and guess what? You are a notary public, okay? And then in Brazil, again, for those competitive cartórios, someone would typically spend a lot of time. If it is like a brilliant person, maybe a decade of study. But I know, like multiple people who would study for several decades, right? Like 2 decades, 3 decades, until they are at the point of passing the examination for, like, a juicy, or a competitive cartório, if you will. Okay, now that's the nuance from like the legal perspective. Let's talk about the functions that you have for cartórios. We have 7 different categories of cartórios. And for you guys, the most relevant ones are going to be, the first one is called RCPN. I'm right over here, RCPN, Registro Civil de Pessoas Naturais. All right, so the RCPN is the cartório for civil events such as birth, marriage, death, adoption, stable union, and some other things, right? So this is the nature of this specific type of cartório. And then we have a second one, which is, they have slightly different names depending on the state, but the way I like to call it is ofício de notas. All right, that's the second one. I'm typing over here so you can follow the names in Portuguese. Ofício de notas, that's where you do the deed, like when you're buying a property and you're going to have a deed of sale, meaning that seller and buyer, they are going to meet in this kind of formal environment, to sign a contract, the so-called escritura in Portuguese. You're going to this type of cartório. So that's the second type I'm addressing over here. Ofício de notas, right? Ofício de notas, They do other things as well, like you could have a deed of stable union done at the ofício de notas. You may have, like different declarations done at ofício de notas, and they have many other activities as well. But the main one, from a foreign citizen perspective, in my opinion, it would be the deed when a foreign citizen is buying property in Brazil. The third one that I think is relevant to foreign citizens is going to be the registro de imóveis. All right, so that's the third type of cartório. Registro de imóveis, interesting enough, in the United States is typically performed by the county, right? So when you have a closing for a real estate property in the United States, closing is going to happen at the title company. I don't know, Chicago Title, right? That's going to be the company checking the title, doing the paperwork, preparing the deed, and handling a bunch of other things. And then once you sign the deed, guess what? They're going to send it to the county. So the county is going to prepare, a new title, or they're going to update the ownership title for that property based on the deed that was signed. So in Brazil, this is done by this specific type of cartório known as registro de imóveis, all right? So this is the third type, and in terms of ownership, so again, they are owned, right? They're owned in a sense by individuals who passed really, really demanding examinations. And it's so interesting, like in the past, the owner of a cartório or the tabelião, they wouldn't be able to open like a business entity because there was this concept that the cartório and the head of the cartório, they are the same thing. And this tradition is still in place nowadays. Whenever you are, for instance, paying, you're going to pay fees, right, when you're going to attend the closing. And many times, guess what? Those fees, they are paid directly to this guy, right, or this lady. And it's very surprising because then, like our client is going to read, well, I'm paying a person, like you saying that I'm paying the cartório, but I see here there is a name of a person. Yeah, so that's still a part of this understanding that the cartório and the person are the same thing. And naturally, under this head of the cartório, you have a bunch of employees, right? For large cartórios in São Paulo, you can easily have 50 employees. For some cartórios in São Paulo, which we work with, they have over 100 employees. But there is still this kind of identity between the cartório and the main officer, okay? They are regulated on a state basis. So you may have, different rules for a cartório in São Paulo and another cartório in Rio de Janeiro, and they do differ substantially, okay? And now something that most people don't get, okay? Even if you are in the same city dealing with the same type of cartório, you're going to have different interpretations because guess what? There is this guy at the top of the cartório who interprets the law, and that's the whole reason for this person to go to law school, and after law school spend God knows how many years studying law, right? So they interpret the law. And guess what? Different heads are going to have different interpretations of the law. So very common in our consultations for someone to come over and say, listen, I want to know exactly which documents we're going to need, right? And then what we're going to answer invariably, right, is going to be, listen, I can give you like a sample list of documents that are customarily requested for this process, but we can never guarantee that your documents are going to be enough because guess what? If whenever, your file runs by the head of the cartório and they think there is something missing or they don't like something, guess what? It's not going to be us attorneys who are going to tell him what should be enforced or not. They are going to enforce whatever they think it should be enforced, right? So regulation on the state level. Now, every now and then you're going to see, some type of situations that are, let's say, unusual for a cartório. Maybe they're refusing a procedure that clearly should be done by the cartório. So we have the possibility of filing. There is a specific judge for like every city, every big city, right? Like, I mean, for smaller towns, it may be a judge from a larger town nearby. And this judge, like, he's going to be responsible for reviewing decisions from the cartórios, okay? So let's say if a cartório decides on something and you don't agree, you have this possibility of filing a petition for this judge who operates along with the cartórios, or is above the cartórios in a sense, for this judge to change the decision that was made by the cartório. Okay, most of the time judges, they don't like to revise a decision from a cartório because from a certain perspective it does bring some instability, right? Because someone is changing what the cartório decided. But every now and then, when a decision from a cartório is clearly incorrect, yes, a judge will reform that decision. All right, general principles. So, sharing just a little bit about the cartórios. Let me know if that was helpful and if you have any specific questions, and we can expand on that for sure. Aspiro, we like to listen. Welcome, Aspiro. Good to have you over here. Okay, what else we have? General principle. Also, São Paulo metros are immaculate compared to New York subways. Yes, that's exactly the case, general principle. Yes. Now, the downside is this kind of reality, right? Like, and I was a few times, like, right, requested to move along or to leave. Like, I remember very clearly, and it wasn't even in my teenager years. I think I was like 21 or 22, and there was like a really nice wall drawing, some sort of art. And then I just wanted, to rest my eyes on the art. And then I sat down, and it wasn't like 3 minutes until a security officer came along and said, "Well, you cannot sit down over here, right? If you wanna, admire the artwork, you gotta stand up." Okay, so. That's the downside. It's very typical of the Brazilian culture, right? Like in the Brazilian culture, maybe because of, it's not the economy, because Brazil is such a rich country, but I believe it's more like, again, a cultural component. There is a lot of respect for things, right? It's not, again, like in the United States, things are there to be used. In Brazil, there is a certain respect, to objects, to things. Like a car is another a very interesting example of such cultural trait. Like cars to Brazilians, like they are something really, really special, right? Like in the United States, I get it. There are also people who, are attached to their cars, right? But in Brazil is a completely different universe, right? Like, I mean, people almost identify themselves with their cars, and not surprisingly, right? Like you're gonna see a really stronger drive for individuals to own, like, luxury brands, and when you're driving in São Paulo, right? Like, I mean, if you're driving through Jardins, right? Jardins translates as gardens. Those neighborhoods, they have all the big brands you could think of, from Ferrari, to Maserati, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, like, I mean, those are lower luxury brands, but São Paulo has all of them, and I think, maybe I'm mistaken, right? But the impression I have is that it's much easier for you to see someone driving a Ferrari in São Paulo than it would be for you to see someone driving a Ferrari or a McLaren in New York City. I don't know, maybe Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, a different ball game, but in New York City, whenever I'm in New York City, I don't see that many luxury cars, but in São Paulo, particularly in those really high-end neighborhoods, you do see. But again, different relationship between the individual and a thing, right? So that's another distinction in terms of culture, right? When we're talking about Brazil and the United States. Let's talk about Portugal as well, right? We don't have many participants here interested in Portugal, but that's something we work on a daily basis as well. I would say Portugal is much closer to the United States than Brazil when it comes to relationship with things, right? So in Portugal, if you are at the subway, if you're taking the ferry boat, people can sit whenever, whatever they want. And you're not going to have this type of, authority supervising the usage of things, okay? So I think Portugal and the United States are closer to that effect. In terms of luxury cars, are not even closer to Brazil in terms of, luxury cars you would see, for instance, in Lisbon or, Porto and whatnot. So very interesting, right? Portugal and Brazil, same language, a somewhat close culture, but from this perspective, potentially closer to the United States than Brazil. All right, let's see what else. Spiral, what permissions you got to have to build on agriculture land, housing, and how hard is to change purpose, intended use of land, right? So for you to build on land, is somewhat similar to the United States. You typically have a county rules for rural properties, and they are usually, much more relaxed than those rules applicable to urban properties. But you still have limitations of usage or guidelines that you need to follow, okay? And purpose, intended use of land, at least from my experience, not as well regulated as it is in the United States. In the United States, it's typically on a state level, right, or a county level. There are certain activities you can handle. I don't know, maybe you want to, have cattle. Maybe you want to have hay. Maybe you want to, do agriculture. And I understand in the United States, typically you need to, check when you're buying the property, right? Like for the title company, you're going to even disclose the purpose of buying the land. And then the title company is usually going to check those intended uses against whatever legislation is, at the county level, or they are also going to see if there is some type of restriction, right? Sometimes when you buy a property, they are going to have restrictions that run with the land. We don't have such concept in Brazil, right? Like restrictions that run with the land. We don't have such concept, but you do have regulations similar to the county level regulations that could preclude a certain usage, right? Now, if you try to articulate those questions, Spiral, with like a realtor, they're gonna say, well, you can do whatever you want, right? And that's probably a reality with many people buying rural properties, right? Like they just do whatever they want. They are not gonna ask for a license to build a house, and that's how they live, okay? And we have an interesting example here at the firm. I think they're about to sign like this client of ours, like he's buying a small ranch, and it's like in São Paulo state, and he's buying this land for the purpose of the real estate investor visa, right? And the good thing is like it's not rural, but it is a large tract of land. And when he got in touch with the sellers, right? He said, well, I'm very happy with the property. He sent a friend over to check the property because he's not in Brazil. Everything looked great, like price, the property, location, everything was perfect. Okay, but when we checked the title, guess what? There was no construction on the title, right? And in Brazil, once you build a house on a land, you must update the title. So the title reflects the construction. Okay, so in his case, he could not buy the property because when we submit the paperwork to immigration, they are not gonna use Google Earth to see if there is a construction over there. They are gonna go by the title. Okay, that's what they are gonna go by. They are gonna use the title first to assess if the property is urban or rural, and that's on the title, okay? And on the title, they don't actually say it's urban or rural. They say in a different way. They actually tell you the type of tax that's paid by the property, and through the type of tax that is paid for that particular property, we can tell you if it is rural or urban, right? But again, going to this case, the problem is that and it is in São Paulo. I'm not talking about the north or countryside of the northeast. I'm talking about São Paulo, and believe it or not, the seller never informed the authorities that he was building a house on the land, right? And you know what? The house, it was probably over there for 20 years. And, guess what? He wasn't paying taxes, right? He was paying taxes on the land, but he wasn't paying taxes on the house, okay? So, you do see this type of reality every now and then. Of course, I would never advise anyone to do that. And here at the firm, we actually try to, elevate the, ethical standards for whoever is in the loop, right? So if we're dealing with sellers, we're not going to accept, cheating, the fraud in the government, naturally, right? Things that could come and bite a buyer, in the back, right? So we typically enforce, very reasonable standards, right? That should be the minimum, I would say, okay? But just sharing, Spyro, some nuances about rural land and housing and so on. Aaron, how does the cultural graffiti thing fit in with the appreciation of things? That's such an interesting question, Aaron. That's an interesting question. So for those of you who don't know, São Paulo is pretty big in terms of graffiti. I remember an old client of mine. He did pass away, I don't know, maybe 5-7 years ago. But about 15 years ago, he would come to Brazil very often. And we would go places with him. Back then, he was, I think, in his 80s already. He was from Massachusetts, had a really nice manufacturing plant, and was working with distributors based in São Paulo. And he would fall in love with graffiti to a point, Aaron, that we even bought him a graffiti book, right? There are even books about São Paulo graffiti. And so we bought him a really nice book, and eventually we gifted the book to this client. Okay, so yeah, São Paulo is big in graffiti. I think it's part of our culture as well. And now we're talking, there are two types of graffiti, right? There is the graffiti, the artistical one that you see all over, São Paulo downtown in so many neighborhoods, right? And then there is the more, how can I say, controversial graffiti, right? Those graffitis in which people basically just write the name of a gang. I don't know if gang is going to be the right term, or maybe a group of people, and then they just write, I don't know, like the crazy ones, and then they basically use a can of spray, and then they write like the group's name, right? This one, I think we can agree, is kind of destructive, and it doesn't really add value. But the other one, the artistical one, is the one in which many times, Aaron, even the São Paulo City Hall, right? Like, I mean, they are going to have certain budgets to buy, or certain nonprofit associations, in addition to the public authorities, they are going to have a budget for young artists to buy, paint and materials, and also to give them access so they can create their art. And I think from this perspective, the way we see graffiti is a way to elevate things, right? So it's not really let's say incompatible, right? Like, I think it's just like a different take on the appreciation of things. Like, it is like we are appreciating a building, and like, because now this building has some art on it, it's more colorful, it's joyful, sometimes playful, like, it's gonna be even more interesting as a thing to us, right? And yes, it's just like a very specific trait of São Paulo. You do see in some other capitals, I don't know, like Rio de Janeiro, I can remember, some graffitis around, but in São Paulo, like, it is everywhere, right? So it does make the city much more interesting. Jonathan, hola Luciano, good to hear wisdom. Good to see you over here, Jonathan. It's been a while. How you doing? I hope everything is good with you. Stephen Nichols, is there a way that traveling for a family emergency will not jeopardize the spousal residency process? Stephen, let's assume you're talking about the marriage-based permanent residency, okay? We do have clients, most of our clients, they are naturally, right, of kind of international, traveling people, and they do eventually travel, and in general, we don't have a problem, okay? We did have an inquiry from, the immigration officers regarding the fact that one of our clients, they were not in the country during like an inspection. And for those of you who don't know, like, when you are applying in Brazil for permanent residency through marriage, there may be, right, like they do on a more random basis, they do visits to your address to make sure it's a bona fide marriage, okay? So what Stephen is asking over here is like, well, what if I'm traveling? What's going to happen, right? So there was one of those circumstances in which the immigration officer, went over there and they couldn't find the person, and there wasn't enough information, like from the doorman, and then, there was some hiccups, but we never had a case, Stephen, in which like the application would be denied, right? Like, but again, whenever you are applying for residency based on marriage, right, that's a really high level track for immigration in Brazil, and we typically advise against traveling. But listen, life happens, and if there is an emergency, we would be fine with our client, traveling. We would document the ongoing application process so they don't have an issue coming back, and they could keep that for the records. If something happens down the line, everything is well documented. Jonathan, Luciano, how do you find the daily safety level in Brazil? Can you wear valuables? Can you drive valuable cars without fear? Jonathan, I clearly, I surely do not recommend, right? And we were talking about safety in our last live stream, which was on Sunday, by the way. And I was very specific. Listen, if you know how to behave in Brazil, like, I mean, you're gonna reduce the risk of headaches with your safety, like, substantially, right? So myself, like, I don't wear jewelry, right? Like, I'm gonna remove my wedding band ring. I'm gonna remove. The watch I use is like an old Apple watch. Like, I don't mind if something happens to this watch. um, and whenever I have my iPhone on me, I'm never gonna make calls, like, when I'm walking down the street, right? So if I need to make a call, I'm just gonna wait until I am somewhere other than on the street, okay? And I also don't wear flashy clothes. Sometimes I'm dressed formally with a suit, and that's fine. But yes, whenever you wear valuables, right? Like if you wear a Rolex, right? Like you kind of asking for trouble. Okay, I guarantee. Or if you are anywhere in Brazil, maybe other than Florianopolis, right, which is a really different animal, right? If you are in São Paulo, if you are, I don't know, in Curitiba, if you are Rio de Janeiro, Fortaleza, Salvador, you name it, or Porto Alegre, okay, you name it. If you're there and you are on the street and you're taking calls and, just mind your business, chances are you're going to have a problem, right? So now, once you understand what you can do and what you cannot do, Jonathan, then like the experience tends to be like pretty stable and safe, if you will, right? It tends, right? Like, not guaranteeing, but like, I spend a lot of time in Rio de Janeiro. I spend a lot of time in Fortaleza, a lot of time in São Paulo, and by just following those few tips that I just told you, you would reduce your chances of running into headaches dramatically. All right. Okay. Nice question, Jonathan. Spyro, thank you very much. You welcome, Spyro. I'm glad that you're here bringing interesting questions to the group. Marisa Navas, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Amo suas lives. Good to see you over here, Marisa. I hope everything is good with you. And Ricardo, thank you so much for showing up. Hamilton, I made an offer using a corretor in Brazil that did not come together, but I'm considering resurrecting the negotiation and want to use a lawyer. I signed nothing with the real estate company. Thoughts? So, are you saying that you're gonna deal with the seller directly? Is that the case, Hamilton? Because most real estate agencies, they have a contract that's gonna address this type of situation. So even if you close without the realtor's help, as long as the realtor introduced you to this property, like at any point in time, like, I mean, he would still be entitled. He would still be entitled to the commission. Okay, so I'm not sure if that's the concern. And listen, in terms of realtor/attorneys, they have different roles. A realtor is there basically to help you find a property. A realtor has no formal training or learning, right, or experience to advise you on the risks of a real estate transaction. Okay, if you work even with higher end real estate agencies, like there is Remax in Brazil, right? We have a partner, and good to remember about that. I need you to show their ad. If you work with Remax in Brazil, they will never, give you like legal advisory, right? Like they're just going to say, listen, this is a property, this is a somewhat standard contract. And whenever you ask like legal questions, Remax is going to say, listen, you gotta, have an attorney, right? You gotta go and hire an attorney. And so realtors and attorneys, they are not like, interchangeable, like they have different purposes. And some agencies, right? They, not typically Remax. Remax doesn't play this game, but many other real estate agencies in Brazil, they're going to say, well, and guess what? We have a legal department, right? And I typically think, it's not ideal, to say the least, because naturally, if there is a lawyer over there, when there is one, right? Because many times they say there is one, there is no lawyer, like they're basically just paying someone, to take a quick look at the documents. But when there is one, like this person is being paid by the real estate agency, and the real estate agency is being paid by the seller, right? So basically, there is a conflict of interest that precludes, that makes very difficult for the lawyer to show you a meaningful issue with the transaction, right? So many times people will rely on realtors and real estate agencies, and I'm not saying that they are dishonest. Like, I'm just saying, like they have a huge incentive to walk you through a transaction, right? Like, I mean, that's their incentive. Like, if there is no transaction, they don't pay their bills at the end of the month, right? So when you have an attorney, right, depending on how you're hiring the attorney, they don't have attachment to a single property, to a single deal. So you can work, through a bunch of prospective transactions and really work with the one that's going to meet your goals. All right, Hamilton, I hope that was helpful. Steven Nichols, obrigado, Luciano. Minha pai está ancient, eu sempre preocupado. Got it, Steven. Yeah, I mean, I hope they're well, all right? And I completely understand if you need to travel for, family needs, by all means, all right? So by all means, just try to reduce, like the traveling during this timeline. Like we typically recommend about 6 months for the person, to try to stay in Brazil during the process of securing the permanent residency through marriage. But listen, again, if you need to travel, we have other clients in the same position. They travel and we support them through the traveling. All right, Steven. Okay, let me see. All right, so, Hamilton, remind me about Remax. Let's play this ad real quick. So that's Remax Nomad States, located in Leblon, a really nice neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. Leblon is actually known nationwide as one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Brazil, Leblon, right? That's where Remax Nomad States is located, and there you have their contact information. If you want to take a screenshot, you can contact them without any commitments, right? Like maybe just to bounce some ideas, ask about, property price ranges. They are very different from us, right? Like, that with a law firm, you typically don't bounce ideas by a lawyer unless you're paying the hourly fee, all right? But with a real estate agency, that's another approach because, again, they are getting, right, like a big commission, basically, for finding the property. So there you go. Let's take a look and see if there is anything else here in the chat window. All right. Yes. Yeah, because we've been talking about real estate transactions, right? I mean, just sharing, we have a couple of new litigation cases here at the firm. And one of these cases is from the northeast of Brazil. This person, they bought first the land, and then they paid like for the construction, okay? And that started in 2021 up to today, right? So we're talking about 5 years down the line. They don't have a title. They don't have a property delivered that they can use. They paid over $200,000, and now they are asking our help, right? Like to potentially recover the monies paid. Okay, and so just to highlight the real strategy. Sometimes people say, well, what type of contract can I get in order to assure I'm going to deliver, I'm going to receive a property that I am buying on an off-plan basis, right? Like off-plan is when you buy a property before this property is ready. And I'm going to tell you my strategy. My strategy is not like based on the paperwork, because there is so much a piece of paper can do for you, right? Like my strategy is to actually pay as little as possible during the construction stage and to pay the bulk of the money against the delivery, right? So I really, my idea is like, typically I'm not going to pay more than 10 or 20% of the purchasing price at contract signature. Then I'm going to pay, I could pay an additional 20 or 30% during the construction stage. And then I pay the balance against the property, right? And this way, you avoid like losing your shirt, which, unfortunately, it is the case for so many foreign citizens, right? And this type of case in the northeast of Brazil, unfortunately, I think we have, if not every week, every other week, we're going to receive an inquiry, okay? And many of them, they will materialize in litigation. Others, sometimes the seller or the buyer will just assume, they have a loss and move along, okay? And then whenever I think about that, I also ask myself, why, would some people be cheap when it comes to legal representation and so fast to write a check when they see a glossy brochure, a glossy flyer, right? I don't know. It is something, probably related to the way that they are being sold an idea. Legal services in particular, right? For some people, they look at it as an expense. And when they look at a brochure with a really nice villa, they are thinking about nice things, right? So they look at it and say, well, I want to, get my money and give it to this guy who's selling me the villa. I don't want to give my money to this attorney who's selling me services, right? And unfortunately, at the end of the day, so many people lose their shirts in Brazil. Okay, so just sharing a little bit about that. If you're gonna do it, no matter what, just make sure you don't pay before this thing is ready. I think it's such a basic concept, right? But still, every other week, at least someone is going to come to us, well, I bought this thing, I paid the money, and they are going to be, really upset naturally, right? But, and I never tell them, right? Like, because my role is to support them and to tell them, the routes for a potential recovery of the monies. But I almost, I feel almost like compelled to say, listen, why would you pay for this whole thing up front? And that happens time after time, okay? So if you're here with me in our live stream, you're not going to do that, right? If you're going to take anything out of today's live, is that you never pay for an off-plan property in full before delivery. It doesn't make sense, right? Again, pay as little as possible during the construction stage. If they are dragging on with the construction stage, you don't pay anymore, right? You go and you do something about it, but you don't give money to something that is clearly not working. All right? I hope that was helpful. Okay, Hamilton, yes, thank you, Luciano. The conflict of interest of dual agency was concerned, yes, Hamilton. Hold on, Hamilton is Christine, if I'm not mistaken, right? Sorry about that, Christine. I should remember about you. Now I see the picture here and I remember. Very happy to be talking with Christine. Mahogano, Olácio Oliveira. The digital nomad visa requires a monthly earning of $1,500. However, how much would you recommend to have a comfy life in Brazil? So Maho, it really depends on what you're looking for, on the destination. Okay, I would say like if you're gonna be in the northeast of Brazil, with 1,500 US dollars, you could live, a good life, particularly if you are a more frugal person. Now, I told you guys before, like, just for the sake of comparison, that's not something that I would ever do. But in Sao Paulo City, there are gyms that are gonna charge you more than 500 US dollars. I'm not talking about reais. They're going to be charging you more than $500 just for a gym. Okay, so as you can see, 1,500 US dollars may have a very different meanings. If you are in a small town in the northeast of Brazil, frugal person, you're going to have a blast with 1,500, right? If you're going to be in Sao Paulo City, like enjoying a more luxurious lifestyle, 1,500 is not going to even buy you a couple of things such as a really high-end gym and I don't know, access to a fancy club in the city, right? So it's all about options, Hamu. But like I said, if that's your budget, you're gonna be living, in a less costly city in Brazil, you're gonna be just fine. All right. Christine, I'm so glad I retained your firm to assist me and watch you for my best interests. Absolutely, Christine. We are very happy. I hope our team is taking good care of you. Remember, right, like for certain key aspects of your transaction, whenever you feel like you can ask me to participate in the loop. But typically, what you see is how it works, right? Like we have our team, they are really I'm really blessed to have this team, and I think you can tell how dedicated they are to your goals, okay? And I'm also happy that you are here with us, Christine. Also, would you recommend someone coming to live in Brazil to start learning Portuguese even before they come? Is it worthy? Obrigado. Mahu, yes. I mean, I watched like whenever I have lunch, I typically have lunch on my desk, right? Like unless I have some meeting, and then I have lunch outside. But most of the time, I lunch on my desk, and then during my lunch time, I like to watch YouTube videos. So I go to YouTube and I see interesting topics. And yesterday, I was watching an interview with. Anthony Robbins, right? Anthony Robbins. I think nowadays he goes by Tony Robbins, and there was a question about learning language, Mahu, and he was actually not talking about learning language. The concept was how to learn, to develop your business or your career or your financial life, and then he was talking about language. Okay, he said, listen. Have you ever studied a language? Like he was asking the interviewer, and the interviewer said, yes, I studied German. And then Anthony Robbins asked, all right, do you speak German? The guy said, no, not really, I don't speak German. So he said, you see, whenever you're learning something like without immersion, it is just something that's gonna, eventually go away. Now, if I take you and I drop you in Italy, for 3 months, and you cannot do anything unless you communicate in Italian. Do you think you're going to learn the Italian language in just 3 months? And the interviewer said, yes, you're absolutely right. So the concept here, Maho, just by applying this idea is that, yes, I mean, when you are immersed in Brazil, it makes it extremely more efficient for your language learning process. And I guess just like other languages, in Brazil, like we don't talk the way that Portuguese is taught, right? So if you learn it through a regular program, if you learn it through formal educational materials, the Portuguese you're gonna speak is not exactly the same Portuguese we speak on an everyday basis, right? So when you are immersed, I guess you can still use like a more formal training environment or material, but the exposure to nowadays situations, I think, is gonna take your learning to the next level. And to be honest with you, most of our clients, right, who come to Brazil, they are not lucky enough to speak Portuguese, right? I think we have a participant here among of us who speak an amazing Portuguese. I'm not gonna tell you who this person is, but I was absolutely shocked by the fluency of this person. Okay, when I spoke with this person, it was just amazing. And to tell you a little bit about the learning process, of course, to reach this level of fluency, we're talking about not only a trip to Brazil, but more like a long time or a long period of time exposure to the culture, to the language, and so on. So, in other words, not years, probably decades until you achieve a level of fluency, closer to a native speaker, if you will. Hey, Christine, all right, Christine is telling you, it's her, it's me. Yes, it is Christine. Christine, if you don't mind, right, like I'm not sharing any private information here, but when I talked to Christine, I said, I think she's Brazilian, right? Like many times we have clients, like we have a new real estate transaction starting. I'm not sure if it was started yesterday. I think it was started yesterday, right? And this gentleman, very interesting, super interesting case. Like this gentleman, his name is German, last name is German. He was raised in the United States, but guess what? He's also Brazilian, right? And right. So sometimes we have such types of people. And when I saw Christine, I said, she's a Brazilian. She gotta be a Brazilian. And she told me she's not, right? So really, really nice example of learning over time and with an amazing accent, right? Like the accent is just like, perfect accent, right? Like I wish I would be able to speak English without a heavy Brazilian accent. But congrats, Christine. Christine is maybe sharing here a piece of, experience with us. The first time I lived in Brazil for a year of full immersion. Brazil is so much more fun when you know the language. Brazilians are so warm and inviting. Thank you so much for sharing, Christine. There you go, Mamu. You have like first-hand advice from someone who really learned the language. All right. So we are about 7 minutes past our end time here. I want to say thank you for your participation. Don't forget to like our video. This is good for our business, and it's also good for other people to find our content. And don't forget to join us. We're going to be here again next Wednesday. So we're probably talking about February the 11th, right? Remember, Wednesdays we meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time, and wishing you all a blessed rest of your day.